changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark with your Chicken Soup for the Soul, and it is Friend Friday, which means I'm chatting with someone interesting from the Chicken Soup for the Soul world. And today, I would like you to meet Ashonti Ford, who wrote an inspirational story for our latest book about 101 Ways to Think Positive. So Ashonti graduated from San Francisco State with a degree in broadcast communications, and then she took an unpaid internship at a TV station really far away on the East Coast. And now she is an award-winning journalist who appears on over 100 different television news stations every morning. She has covered lots of national stories. Early in her career, she covered the Trayvon Martin case in Florida. She's a national correspondent in Washington, D.C., and she covers the White House, Congress, and foreign affairs. She has met with President Biden and members of the administration, as well as key lawmakers, but she keeps her passion for in-depth stories that impact underprivileged communities. And in her pursuit of the real story about those communities, she has also been awarded several Pulitzer Center grants to cover important international and domestic issues. And I want to talk very much about that. But first, I want to say hi to Ashonti and then start off by discussing your story in our new book. So hello, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you for that really nice, detailed intro. I'm just kind of trucking along over here doing what I love. So it's always interesting to hear it all laid out. So thank you so much. And thanks for having me.
Oh, well, sure. We're really pleased that you could take a break from your very busy Washington schedule. So let's start out with, how did you get started? Because I know you wrote a story for 101 Ways to Think Positive. And prior to that, you had written another story for our book called I'm Speaking Now. And in both stories, you talk about making your way up the ladder in broadcast journalism. And you had a particularly difficult start because of what happened in your personal life as you were beginning your career after graduating from college. So why don't you tell us about that story that you put in our Thinking Positive book?
Yeah, I feel like that story is really just a small nugget to my very rocky start in news. But I guess determination is really what pushed me, even before the situation that happened with my ex, because I took many unpaid internships. It took me quite some time to get into television news. After that internship with CBS News in Miami, I didn't get a job in news, even still. I actually had to re-enroll in school to become eligible for yet another internship that was unpaid. And I actually was about to give up. I ended up at the time, former President Barack Obama was in office, and he had made it a law, essentially, to have health care. So I said, hey, well, I'm tired of being broke and I'm living in Miami. Didn't really want to go back to California. So I said, let me make it work here. So I became a licensed healthcare broker for about 2 years. And I remember one day just looking up, because we worked in a call center and being like, I am so far from what I intended to come here and accomplish. I'm so far from journalism. And so I ended up going back home to California, got a job at Dash Radio as on-air talent, re-enrolled in school so I can be eligible for yet another internship. I was interning in Palm Springs for their local NBC channel, made another newsreel, and then I finally got my first job in news, Salisbury, Maryland. So it took quite a bit, but it's interesting. Sometimes when you have to try so hard and be redirected so many times to get to what you want to do, it almost makes you appreciate it just that much more.
It's incredible. And I don't know how much harder it was to break in because of being a woman and also being a Black woman. I mean, I don't know. I imagine it was even worse. Just being a woman, I know, makes it so much worse.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, and I could talk about that for days, right? Because, no news director will come out and say what they're looking for appearance-wise or whatever the case, but it's television, right? So news directors, hiring managers, they are looking for the face and the sound that appeals with their market. And, not all African American women appeal with every market. And maybe other women of other races can say the same, but it took some time. And I wrote a lot about this in the first book, the first feature. I'm speaking now with Chicken Soup. There was, the whole hair thing. Now I've since grown my hair out. We can thank the pandemic for that. But I used to wear this really spicy little afro or real spicy little shortcut. And that wasn't for everyone. I remember when I cut my hair, my news director at the time all of a sudden started coming up with issues. And it's interesting. I think being a woman and a woman of color on top of that, even though we check two, the EEOC boxes, even though we check two boxes when it comes to actually getting the job or even getting in front of somebody so you can prove to them that you can do the job, it's tough.
Well, I've seen a lot of your appearances on Instagram, and you're not only gorgeous, but also really, really good at reporting the news. So we're just going to take a little break for an ad. And then when we come back, I want to talk to you about what your day is like as a broadcast journalist, because hardly anybody actually gets to do what you do. So we will be right back. We're back with Ashonti Ford. So we've talked about how you got where you are as a broadcast journalist or an on-air reporter or whatever the proper term is for the job that you do. But what is it like? How does a typical week go for you?
It's evolved, Amy, over time. For the last almost decade, I would call myself a character-driven storyteller, a character-driven reporter, a local news reporter, meaning I'm on the streets. I'm in the community, deep in the community, telling people stories, no matter how big or small, and making an impact on the ground. I'll give you an example. There was a woman, this is when I was in the Tampa market. Her son late at night was walking along their road. They didn't have sidewalks in this specific neighborhood. And unfortunately, he was hit and killed by a car. So this mom started this petition to get sidewalks in her area. And she wasn't getting any attention from commissioners, which is who she would need to kind of make that happen, to push that forward. And so she found me, or we found each other, and I ended up taking on the story. And after some research and talking to the city, I found that there were several people that were hit and either badly injured or killed on that same road. So now I have my story, right? So I come up with this huge story. I do this very emotional interview with this mother that had just lost her 20-year-old son. And all of a sudden now the commissioners are coming out of the woodworks and they're ready to help put these sidewalks in this community. So I spent almost a decade being a character-driven storyteller, which I love. I still love. But now I'm a national news correspondent for the Capitol and the White House. And I will admit, I've been doing this for about a year and a half now. I will admit, when I first started the job, I was having a hard time finding my purpose because, a local news reporter, even though it's a lot more grunt work, it's a lot more outsideness. It's a lot more. There was just a drive-by. You got to wake up at 3:00 in the morning and be outside. So even though it's more dangerous and not as comfortable, I really felt like the work that I was doing had a direct impact to these communities. And so I had a hard time, honestly, when I first started here with finding my purpose. But now I've learned that my purpose is breaking politics down because they're so important and they impact everyone. Breaking politics down in a way that everyone can understand, even just when it comes to the smallest words, like bipartisan, right? We might be able to have a conversation and we understand what bipartisan means, but other people don't sometimes. And when they hear that, they just tune out. So maybe instead of saying bipartisan, I just say both, just making it easier for people to understand. So my day-to-day nowadays looks like waking up at about 3:00 in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah, 3:00 in the morning. I get fully dressed, hair, makeup, all the good stuff. I do walk in with rollers, admittedly so, because I like to take those out right before I go on air. And then I get to the studio. I have a director and photographer there, so they turn the lights on in the studio and such. I'm not there alone. They make sure all the engineering stuff is working in the background. We need our engineers, of course. But I just do a deep dive into what happened the night before, right? Because I'm going to sleep at about 8 p.m. So what happened the night before? What changed? Is there any breaking news? But it's no longer local driven. I'm a national news correspondent. So I got to know what's going on with the war overseas. I got to know the latest on offshore drilling. I got to know what XYZ said in the debate. I got to know about President-elect's mandates. I got to know where the polls are with VP Harris and Trump. I got to know it all. Because while we do send suggested questions out to our stations, and anywhere between 10 and 25 stations book me every morning. So it's pop, 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 pop. It's a hit from 6 a.m. to 6:09 and 6:10 to 6:15 and 6:16 to 6:20 and so on. Between 6 and 10 a.m., I'm essentially live the entire time. And so we send our stations suggested questions, but these stations, Amy, are all over the nation. So what our station in Memphis cares about might not be the same as what our station in Vegas cares about, right? We might have some markets that are hyper driven on this mass deportation and the border and what's going on and how it impacts them. And then we have other stations that are more interested in offshore drilling. And then we have some that aren't interested in that at all. They are really interested in the war and how it impacts this large minority of people that they have in their communities. So I say that to say you got to be sharp. I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of listening to news podcasts, watching the news. I get a lot of news notifications on my phone. I don't really have an on and off time. You know what I mean? Because I'm off right now, right? It's 4:20. So I've been off of work, but I still have to be tapped in because come tomorrow morning, if my station out of Colorado asks me about XYZ bombing that happened not too far from them, and they want to know how President Biden is responding to it, they want to know what members of Congress, what kind of money they're going to put forth to fix this, I have to know. So essentially, that's what every day looks like. I wake up at 3 a.m., I go into the studio, I do my research, and then I take the rollers out of my hair, put my lipstick on, and I'm live from about 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., Monday through Friday.
Well, I think it's particularly important now because so many people aren't getting their news anymore from responsible journalists like you. They're getting their news from social media, from TikTok of all things. I mean, from crazy sources. They don't even understand the difference between reputable news sources and just some guy sitting in his basement, you know?
Right.
They don't know the difference. Well, I wanted to talk also about these Pulitzer grants that you got because I had never heard of them before. My son is a print journalist. And, all I ever heard about was Pulitzer Prizes, which print journalists, of course, really want. But I didn't know there was also Pulitzer Grants. And I understand Pulitzer Grants are not the same organization as Pulitzer Prizes. But then when I looked it up, I saw that the woman who seems to be behind the Pulitzer Grants was married to Joseph Pulitzer at one point. So there seems to be some relationship. But how do you get a Pulitzer Grant? Is that more accessible to people? And I also noticed that I think one of the ones that you got was to write about Black cowboys in America. And I saw a photo of you with your late grandfather, and he was wearing a cowboy hat. And I thought, oh my goodness, was he a Black cowboy?
He wasn't a Black cowboy, but he was so much to me. My grandfather is so intertwined in my journey through news. He did just recently pass away from cancer. I had no idea that cancer moves so quickly. So that was something that was very hard for me and my family. But, every market that I went to, and I've been to 5, 6 different news stations, 5, 6 different states, my grandfather would fly from California to drive me wherever I needed to go. So he might not have been a cowboy in a sense, but he definitely was my hero. And for the Pulitzer grants, I would suggest your son and any print or, television journalists look into it. So the Pulitzer Center essentially is a nonprofit organization that funds journalists to tell underreported stories, whether they be domestic, which I've done some domestic, or they be overseas. They do it all. The Pulitzer Center is a fantastic organization that really understands the importance of some of those stories that sometimes just don't get airtime, whether that be because they're just not sensational. Sometimes in some news, local news specifically, they have this saying, if it bleeds, it leads, right? But some stories that are very important don't necessarily bleed. So all the same, the Pulitzer Center really focuses on bringing journalists in that get it. And sometimes those are photojournalists like your son. So it's not always about television. So you essentially will write up your proposal. You'll write up your idea. I've done stories on the rise of domestic abuse in Puerto Rico, Black cowboys, like you've mentioned. I did a story about a woman that was in Iraq when they actually had that terrible, how do we want to call it? It wasn't an escape, but a lot of them are still on the run in different parts of that area. A lot of people are still on the run because when troops finally, after 20 years, left that region, they left so quickly that they left behind very important documentation that the Taliban and such got a hold of, which actually outed all of these people that had been working undercover for them. So I actually found one of those people that live in New York. And so that's an underreported story. I had to go through great lengths to get her to agree to the story, but those are the type of stories that the Pulitzer Center cares about. And I enjoy that because as much as some news stations might want to cover this, they just might not have time for a 6-minute piece in their 30-minute newscast. The Pulitzer Center has the time though. So you write up your proposal, you write up how much it's going to cost to get to these different locations, and the Pulitzer Center will say yay or nay. And that's kind of the gist of it. Now, if you work in television news or you work for any other broadcast company, the Pulitzer Center would love if the company would partner with them, the newspaper or whatever may have you, and also publishing the work, but it's not mandatory. So yeah, I absolutely love the Pulitzer Center. I've been so busy with the election and now the late Jimmy Carter's funeral. I've been so busy that I haven't really had an opportunity to go in and come up with any other pitches. But the Pulitzer Center is absolutely an organization that I would recommend.
Yeah, that's a really great discovery. Well, we have to close now, but I'm so grateful that you were able to take the time when it's really your evening already, even though it's my afternoon, because you're going to be getting up at 3 a.m. So thank you so much for joining us today. And for our listeners, I'm Amy Newmark, and that was Ashonti Ford. Thanks for listening today. If you have your own stories, you can do what Ashonti did. Go to chickensoup.com and check out the Submit Your Story section of our website. Ashonti, thank you very much, and I look forward to reading more of your stories in the future.
Thank you.